Judgment Hall. Lesson 4. The mob that took Jesus captive in the Garden of Gethsemane led him to the courtroom of the high priest Caiaphas, where their Jewish religious leaders were gathered. Peter followed the crowd that led Jesus away, but he stayed far in the rear at a very secure distance. When the procession came to the courtyard of the high priest, Peter sneaked in and sat with the servants and the soldiers to see what was to be done with Jesus. Jesus was put on trial that night before the Sanhedrin, the religious governing body of Israel. The Roman government, which ruled over the land, allowed the Sanhedrin to punish people who were guilty of breaking some religious law, but they did not let them sentence anyone to death. Only the Roman governor Pilate could do that, though it was illegal to hold a trial in the middle of the night. These religious rulers hated Jesus so much that they were willing to do anything to get rid of him, even to break their own laws. Probably the main reason for the night trial was that they wanted to have it all over before the people who loved Jesus found out what had been done. These religious leaders were jealous because so many of the common people believed in Jesus and loved him. They were envious of his power to heal the sick and work mighty miracles. How they hated him. Jesus stood alone and friendless in the midst of these Jewish priests and rabbis who hated him. They kept questioning him, trying to trap him and make him condemn himself. They brought false witnesses who lied about him in order to make a case against him. Even though he had never done anything wrong, they were very eager to find Jesus guilty so they could get Pilate to sentence him to death. The high priest said to Jesus, "I demand in the name of the living God that you tell us whether you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "Yes," Jesus said, "I am." Angrily, the high priest tore his clothing as the Israelites often did when they were grieved or horrified. He shouted, "Blasphemy! We don't need other witnesses. You have all heard him make this claim. What is your verdict?" They all shouted, "Death! Death! He deserves death." Then they spit in his face, struck him with sticks, blindfolded him, and slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Messiah. Who hit you that time?" It was long past midnight when all this was happening, and the night air was chilly. Peter joined the soldiers and servants who had built a fire in the courtyard. While Peter was warming himself, a servant girl came over and said to him, "You were with Jesus, weren't you? For both of you are from Galilee." Peter got scared when he heard this. He thought that he, too, might be arrested and perhaps killed if they found out he was a follower of Jesus. So Peter denied it loudly. "I don't even know what you're talking about," he said angrily. Peter felt very uneasy. Soon another servant girl recognized him and said to those standing around, "This man was also with Jesus of Nazareth." Peter heard this remark, and it filled him with terror. He felt he must convince these people that he was not a friend of Jesus. So with an angry oath, he said, "I don't know the man." After a while, some of the bystanders came over to Peter and said, "We know you are one of Jesus' disciples. We can tell by your Galilean speech." More fearful than ever, Peter began to curse and swear. "I don't even know the man," he said, and immediately the rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Suddenly, looking up, he caught sight of Jesus, his hands bound and marks of sorrow on his face. At that moment, the Lord looked up on Peter. Their eyes met. Peter was filled with sorrow and grief. Jumping to his feet in shame, he rushed out to the courtyard and wept bitterly. Early that morning, Jesus was pushed and dragged into the midst of a jeering mob to Pilate's palace. Because it was a Passover feast, the Jews will not go into Pilate's judgment hall, So the governor spoke to them as they stood in the courtyard, and there standing before this hysterical, angry crowd of religious leaders was the Son of God. They shook their fists and loudly shouted the words of accusations that they could curse and swore at him. Pilate was surprised as he looked at the prisoner. He had expected to see a violent and rebellious criminal, but before him stood a calm, quiet, dignified man, showing in his face tender love for those who hated him so. When Pilate could finally quiet the raging mob, he asked the chief priest, "What charges do you bring against this man? What has he done wrong?" "He's a criminal, a liar, and an impostor," they shouted. "He says he's the Son of God, and he claims to be a king." Then Pilate said, "Well, take him yourselves and try him by your own religious laws." "But we want him crucified," they demanded, "and your approval is required." Pilate was amazed at Jesus' peaceful face and quiet calmness. He probably thought to himself, he certainly acts like God's son, and he's behaving himself like a king. I will ask him, "Jesus, are you truly the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "Yes, I am." The furious crowd, led by the religious leaders, screamed accusations such as, "You heard him, made these preposterous claims. He's lying. He's no more a king than we are. Crucify him." Pilate turned to the chief priests and the raging mob and declared, "I find no fault in this man." The crowd was infuriated and cried out all the more, "Crucify him." Then weak, cowardly Pilate had another idea. He told the crowd, "You have a custom that I release someone from prison each year at the Passover. I'll release Jesus." "No," they yelled. "Away with this man and release the robber Barabbas." "What then shall I do with Jesus?" asked Pilate. "Crucify him." For the third time Pilate asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" And their only answer was, "Crucify him." Pilate was about to let the people have their way with Jesus, but he did not want to be blamed. So he took a basin of water and washed his hands, as if to wash away his guilt. And he said, "I am an innocent of this man's blood." The Jewish leaders were willing to take the blame, so they shouted, "His blood be on us and our children." What a terrible responsibility. So Pilate gave the awful command to take him out and scourge him. He probably thought if he let the soldiers lash Jesus with that cruel Roman whip, they would forget about killing him. The scourge used on Jesus was a rod with 9 leather straps attached to it. Woven into the straps were charred pieces of glass, bone, and metal. How he suffered as lash after lash fell across his back. Soon his flesh was cut to ribbons and blood flowed down his whole body. Hundreds of years before, the prophet Isaiah had said, "He was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities." The cruel and hateful soldiers blindfolded Jesus, doubled their fists and hit him, slapped him in the face and spit on him, and Jesus allowed them to do it. Then they all began mocking and ridiculing Jesus, saying things like, "You claim to be a king. All right, we'll dress you up like a king." They dropped a purple robe against his bloody shoulder, saying, "A king is supposed to wear a royal robe. And yes, a crown. But you're not going to wear a gold crown studded with jewels." And with wicked, enduring laugh, they gathered some long, sharp, thick thorns and braided them into a crown. They pressed the crown of thorns down on his sacred brow until blood ran down his face. They made him hold a reed as a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mockery. "Hail, King!" they yelled. "You are not our king." They spit on him again and grabbed sticks and beat him on the head. After they had done their worst, they led their bleeding prisoner back to the judgment hall. When Pilate saw him, he brought him out where the people could see him. "What a pitiful sight he was," Pilate said. "Look at the man." But the crowd had no pity for Jesus. They shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Again Pilate called out, "I find no fault in him." Shaking their fingers in his face, the crowd screamed, "Governor, if you don't let us crucify Jesus, we'll report you to Caesar. We'll tell him you have another king to whom you are loyal, and you'll lose your job." And with that, Pilate was too much of a coward to set Jesus free. That did it. Pilate was trying to be on two sides at one time, which is always very difficult. Pilate didn't want Jesus killed because he was convinced Jesus was innocent, and yet Pilate was so selfish and ambitious that he didn't want to get into trouble with Caesar, the Roman emperor who had given him his job. Pilate surely wanted to remain as governor because he loved his importance, the honor, and the high salary that he received, and he also wanted to please the people whom he ruled. Pilate, knowing that all hope was gone and that the people would never agree to his releasing Jesus, let them have their way. Pilate sentenced Jesus to death by crucifixion. Today, hundreds of years later, the question Pilate asked the mob of people comes to every boy, girl, man, and woman. What should I do then with Jesus? Many of us heard about Jesus all of our lives. Are we still saying, "I know I ought to receive Jesus as my Savior, but what will my best friend say?" Or am I going to wait till I'm older, or until I have had my good time and have done some of the things he might not want me to do? If you have never invited him into your hearts as a Savior, don't wait any longer, but trust him now before it's too late.